Today's reading is from Rays of the One Light, Weekly Commentaries on the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita by Swami Kriyananda. Is God present everywhere, even there where there is ignorance? Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. The Gospel of St. John, chapter 1, makes a reference to the divine light that is obscure to the rational faculty. But they enlightens our higher nature. The light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended not. Reason recalls from this statement with innumerable questions. What is this darkness? Is it conscious that it should comprehend anything? What sort of light would be capable of shining in darkness without transforming it, at least that part of the darkness in which it shines into light? Does this light shine only at night? And if so, why only then? The solution is that, to divine sight, even daylight seems darkness. The sun itself, like the moon, which shines only by reflecting light from the sun, is but a kind of reflection of the cosmic light, which being immaterial is invisible to the eyes, but which is the great source of all material reality. In Autobiography of a Yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda describes this joyful vision to Ram Gopal Musamdar, the sleepless saint, who lived in the vision of the hidden light. Around midnight, Yogananda wrote, Ram Gopal fell into silence, and I laid down on my blankets, closing my eyes. I saw flashes of lightning. The vast space within me was a chamber of molten light. I opened my eyes and observed the same dazzling radiance. The room became a part of the infinite vault which beheld with interior vision. Why don't you sleep? Sir, how can I sleep in the presence of lightning, blazing everywhere my eyes are shut or open? You are blessed to have this experience. The spiritual radiators are not easily seen. The saint added a few words of affection. This is that light that shines in darkness. It has been described variously in the great scriptures. In the Bhagavad Gita, the 11th chapter, the devotee Arjuna is given an experience of the infinite state and exclaims in awe, if there should rise suddenly within the skies sunburst of 1,000 suns, flooding earth with beams and dim of, then might be that Holy One's majesty and radiance dreamed of. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Well, welcome to our Sunday service. My name is Peter. This is my wife, Marga. It's our pleasure to share Sunday service with you today. I'd like to welcome everyone here with us, especially our guests at the Expanding Light for the Yoga Teacher Training Program and the Chanting Workshop, and especially those of you who are for the first time, the First Timers Weekend. Maybe a change in consciousness to be here, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So it's our pleasure to share with you. I'd like to continue with a reading from Whispers from Eternity. These are prayer demands by Paramahansa Yogananda. Demand to set fire to the forest of darkness. I built a fire of devotion in the dark forest of delusion. Alas, the fire only smoldered. Then thou didst come and set fire to a few of my frailties. That fire quickly spread, consuming the bushes of my prickly desires, my tall, towering vanities, and the thick underbrush of my arrogance. The whole forest of my darkness is blazing, and I behold only thy light shining everywhere. I thank thee, Father, for thy help. Help me thus always. Let me open a path of light for all to follow. So we're talking about today about consciousness. And consciousness isn't necessarily an easy topic to talk about or an easy thing to grasp. Consciousness is that, it's not even easy to define. Consciousness is who we are, our awarenesses, our perceptions, the feelings, what comes in, what we're aware of around us. It's consciousness. But the scriptures go way beyond that, and they say the whole world is consciousness. This, what we're living in, is a manifestation of God's consciousness. It was a unified consciousness, a oneness that moved outward into creation and moved downward through the causal level, the astral level, the physical level, to manifest this. And everything is a piece of that consciousness, a piece of God's consciousness. And everything has some degree of that consciousness. They're not, all the degrees aren't the same. On the one hand, there's darkness. There's the dark consciousness. And it does not comprehend the highest consciousness of light, of God, of that oneness. It comprehendeth it not, the darkness. It's there, it's conscious, but it's only in its own consciousness. And there's a saying in the Indian scriptures, which I've always loved, that says, God's consciousness sleeps in the rocks and minerals, it dreams in the plants, it begins to awaken in the animals, and has its potential to fully awaken in the human consciousness. Well, the consciousness of rocks doesn't necessarily comprehend the human consciousness, and human consciousness doesn't necessarily comprehend as far as it can go into the divine consciousness. So what do we do about that? How do we move on that progression of consciousness? That's what the spiritual path is all about. It's about awakening, it's about expanding, it's about being more and more aware, more and more perceptive. That divine light, that unity of consciousness is always there, as it was when Yogananda went to see Ram Gopal Muzumdar. Those lights are always blazing. Do we perceive the lights? Do you perceive the lights blazing in 1,000 suns? Not always. Not even most of the time. But that's where we're trying to go. And there's a few things that we can, it's not that hard. There's a few things we can help us on our way that'll help us tune into the fact that consciousness does change. One of the members of our community, Bharat Joseph Cornell, has developed a whole series of nature awareness activities that help people to tune into nature, to tune into God in nature. And one of the ones that I've always liked is, he calls it an interview with nature. And you go out into nature and you sit with something and you try to relate to the consciousness of that thing. So it could be a boulder. And you go out there and you sit on the boulder and you tune into rock consciousness. You know, what's it like to be a rock? What happened here? How have you been? What's it like when the weather changes? What's it like when some people come and sit on you? And you tune into rock consciousness. You can also tune into the consciousness of the trees and the plants, and that's a little bit easier because consciousness is dreaming there. It's not just asleep. So you can feel a little bit more of that connection in nature. And you can also get to the animal level. And I'm sure pet lovers, all of you with cats and dogs can relate to this, but have you ever tuned into cat consciousness? Watching your cat being a cat, watching your dog being a dog. And as a higher level of consciousness, we can relate to those lower levels of consciousness. We can see what it's like to be in a dog and just... That's about the universe. It's like, oh yeah, food, yeah. And, they love that. Or cats, you know, they're a little bit more withdrawn, cat consciousness, but they're, you know, they still have their certain thing. So once we get to the human level, though, it's a little bit harder for us to go beyond that, because the thing about consciousness is our perceptions, our thoughts, our experiences it's hard to relate to something we haven't experienced. And higher consciousness is up above, up beyond, is more, it's bigger. And it's not always to tune in. It's not always easy to tune into that. We can read spiritual books. They can tell us the divine light, it's always there, wonderful joy, wonderful bliss. What does that really feel like? If we don't have that consciousness, it's difficult to make that jump. It's difficult to get out of our ego consciousness, because once you've gotten to the human level, you get this thing called the ego. And that's this awareness of self, awareness of consciousness, but it's identified with a body. It's got all kinds of little fences up, all kinds of little delusions, all kinds of little definitions to keep you functioning. Now, it's important, because if you don't have a strong enough ego sense, at one level, it's really hard to function in this world. Now, so what if this is mental illness. I mean, what if you told somebody who's just got barely a grip on reality, it says, well, you're this little speck of consciousness on this little mud ball in a little piece of space going around one sun of billions of suns in a galaxy of 100 billion galaxies. You're not very significant. It's like, oh my God, you could suddenly, somebody could sort of flip out and want to go back to rock consciousness right there. They may not, be able to relate to that. So the ego is an important stage of getting us to deal with that we are really infinitesimal and unimportant, but it keeps us functioning. It keeps us moving. It keeps us trying to be here to do this thing, to relate. So how do we keep moving beyond that ego consciousness? One of the first steps is to realize, and this is one of the progressions on the spiritual path, to realize that you do have a consciousness, that you are constrained by the way you think, the feelings you have, the culture you're in, the way you relate to things. And one of the first steps often on the spiritual path for people is to get beyond our initial consciousness, our initial culture, to have experience of something else. In the past, Swami Kriyananda writes about going to Charleston, South Carolina, and he tried to relate to all different kinds of strata of society, all different people in Charleston, just to see, what's it like? What's other people's consciousness like, to move out beyond our own? And I had, there were a couple of interesting experiences that came to mind early in my career, before I was really on the spiritual path, and about relating to other consciousness. And I was in college, and my brother and I had decided to take, we had a break, we had a few days off, and we decided to go backpacking. And we were in New Jersey, and we wanted to go to the Shenandoah Mountains of Virginia. We didn't have a car, and we didn't really want to spend money on a bus, and besides, buses didn't go to the Shenandoahs, so we decided to hitchhike. And I wouldn't recommend this, but if you're interested in tuning into other consciousness, try hitchhiking, because you never know what you're going to get. So we were in a rather difficult position. We had made it from New Jersey down to the outskirts of Washington, D.C., and we had sort of forgotten that we wanted to go a little bit more west, and we ended up going south because that's where the ride was going. And it was rush hour, and we found ourselves at an exit on the Beltway in rush hour. Now, if you've ever hitchhiked, this is not where you want to be. You don't want to be in an urban area in rush hour trying to hitchhike on a freeway. Bad scene. So we were kind of despairing of, oh my God, what are we going to do? We're going to spend our vacation here on the on-ramp on the Beltway. And all of a sudden, this pickup truck just sort of swerved across 2 lanes of traffic, came over, and motioned us to get in, and said, hurry up, get in. You can't pick people up here. The cops will come, get in here. So we jump in this pickup truck, and we kind of jumped into a different consciousness. There was a guy in the truck who was, he was a tradesman. I think he was a painter. He was coming home from work, and he was drinking, and he had his music on, and he said, well, where are you guys going? So, we're trying to go to the Shenandoahs. He said, whoa, the Shenandoahs, that's a long way that way. And, well, I'm going to the races, and maybe that's on the way. I don't know. We'll see what we can do for you. So the next thing you know, we're going to his house, because he had to pick up his girlfriend so they could go to the races. And we walked into this house, and, I'm sort of from a middle-class background, and I walked into this house. It was a different consciousness. There was, it was piles of dirt, sort of all over, and cans, and junk food. But this guy was a really nice guy. And, my brother and I just sort of sitting in this house looking at each other as, whoa, I don't think we're in Kansas anymore here. But, he got it together, and he started telling us all about the races he was going to. I'd never even thought about races or anything about car races or drag races, but this was his life, usually on a Friday afternoon, which it was. He was going to the races. He said, yeah, you could come to the races with me. We could do this. And I said, no, I think we'd like to go backpacking. And he ended up, he took pity on us. And after sort of trying to convert us to his consciousness, he realized we weren't really going to be into the races. And he took us a long way toward where we wanted to go out of his way. And he dropped us off and we were on our way. But I just sticks in my mind because, whoa, that was a very different consciousness than what I'm used to. So you can change. You can tune into things. Another great way to tune into a different consciousness is go to a different culture. There it's, you surround yourself and you look around and it's hard to relate to your thoughts and your feelings and what you're thinking because everybody around you is thinking something a little bit differently. I was once on this island off the coast of Tunisia called Djerba, and it was an island that was a very simple, they had a very simple culture there until Club Med had discovered Djerba, and they had brought this this club, the usual tourist resort to there, and other resorts had come and taken over the island. So around the outskirts on the beach were this Western, mostly European culture, and then there were still the people living there. And I decided I wanted to get out of the Club Med culture and go visit a little bit what else was happening there. So I rented a bicycle and I started bicycling through the interior of the island, and I got a flat tire and I didn't have a pump. So I found somebody who could help me, and he spoke a little French, and so we were able to communicate. And he brought me to his house. And his house was this simple mud brick structure, one room, no paint, no doors, no windows, no running water, no electricity. But there in the corner of his hut was a television. And the television was run off this little battery, which he took into a neighboring gas station or someplace where he could charge it. And his perception of my consciousness was what he had learned from the movies. And he started asking me about John Wayne. He said, do you know John Wayne? Do you know Westerns? I like Westerns. Is that like what? And, so we started to have a little bit of conversation, but his consciousness projecting to my consciousness was really quite different. And it really didn't mesh all that well. And we had some communication, and it was, again, one of those experiences is, whoa, there's a lot of different consciousnesses out here in the world. So then we start moving on and we start hearing about the spiritual path, and we start hearing about all these wonderful consciousnesses which we can aspire to, and you go, well, how do I do that? How do I get to where the saints are? How do I really start experiencing some of these other things? Because I tried race car consciousness. I didn't like that. That was pretty easy to get into, but it wasn't where I wanted to go. I want to go higher. It's not always easy to move into that higher consciousness. One of the things that you first need to remember is that we attune ourselves to consciousness. We don't create it. We attune ourselves to it. So the scriptures say there's waves of consciousness. There's swirls of consciousness. There's this vast oceans of consciousness all around us all the time. If you read about the different worlds, there's Yukteswar describes the physical plane as this little balloon basket hanging below a huge, much bigger astral plane, which is again encompassed in a causal plane. All those realities, all those planes are right here, right now. Just like there's television waves going through this room, and we could tune into a football game if you were a television antenna. Well, you can also tune into waves of consciousness that are coming through this room. And we have to realize, okay, I'm attuning. It's there. It's not something I'm creating. It's not something I have to change. I'm just attuning to what's there. And you can do this. Even the most, even if you've never thought about being on the spiritual path, you can have an experience of attunement. There's various ways to think about this. One is, think about, I'm sure you've all had this experience. What about you've never heard of a word or a concept or a certain thing? Somebody tells you about it. What happens? Immediately, within the next days, hours, you're suddenly seeing those things. You're hearing that word. We were going skiing, and one of my teenage son's friends started telling us about four-wheel drive and how you can put snorkels on your vehicle so you can go underwater and it won't ruin your engine. Well, this is something I had never really attuned into. But it was interesting. But guess what? Right after that, I see a car. Oh yeah, that's a snorkel on the engine, so these guys could go underwater and not ruin their engine. There it is. I'd never seen it before in my life, never heard of it, and there it is. You want to try an experiment of attunement? try going to the mall and tune into teenage consciousness. So just take a seat in the mall, sit on a little bench, and watch teenagers. Now, they all are in this consciousness. They didn't invent it. They tuned in together. They're all listening to the same kind of music. They're all dressed the same. They're all speaking the same kind of language. They all have the same kind of body language. They all have the same attitudes. And you can, they attune to each other. And you could attune to that if you want to. But you don't really want to attune to teenage consciousness. You want to attune to a higher consciousness. So what do? You try to tune in to the saints. You try to have satsang with people who are of that higher consciousness. But you just start learning about it. You start attuning it, and it'll start seeping in. It's not a fast process, but you'll start getting pieces of it. There's another thing you can do, and this may be tempting to people. Basically, consciousness is changing through history. And if you go back to the Middle Ages, it's a very different consciousness than it was now. We have made progress. We have made progress toward more light, toward more divine attunement, kindness, generosity, fellow feeling, relating to other people's realities. That wasn't real present in the Middle Ages. If you, I enjoyed reading Swami Kriyananda's The Time Tunnel. It's a book where he talks about these children who travel in time. And he has one chapter where they travel backwards into the Middle Ages. And they visit a woman and they help rescue her and take her to a castle or something. But he portrays very well that consciousness of Kali Yuga, of the lower age. Everything is fixed. There's no hope of changing my situation. It's fate. It's all about physical. It's all about, a violent, brutish, and short life. And he portrays that. If you read Catherine's new book about William the Conqueror, Master Yogananda said that he was William the Conqueror, and he lived in the 11th century. This was an avatar, and a realized being was back in the 11th century. Well, the consciousness of that time was very different from what it was when he was here teaching in the United States. And if you read Catherine's book, here's the same avatar, the same realization. But what was he doing back then? I mean, he was showing firmness, power, unyielding military strength. That was what it was taking to reform and to move consciousness even a little back then. He couldn't approach it with, the Precepta lessons and give them to his knights and say, why don't you guys read the Precepta lessons? We're going to meditate a little bit, and we're going to, that wouldn't do it back then. That was the consciousness, and he had to start there. So as we move into a new age, we're in the age of energy, but we're only 100 years into the real age of Dwapara Yuga. And consciousness is changing because we're moving closer to that center of consciousness in the universe. But you know what? It's not changing that fast. Depending, it looks like we're making progress and things are being discovered. We're taking science. We're taking all the investigative methods we have, and we're starting to realize that, yes, there is a greater reality than the material reality. There's energy. There's consciousness. People have done all kinds of great experiments about just consciousness affecting physical things. It's proven beyond a doubt with a scientific method of healing at a distance. It's been proven. The power of prayer, that homeopathic vibrational medicine can work. So we're making tremendous progress, and just being part of this culture, we are going to get some of that. We are going to advance in consciousness. But we're only 100 years into Dwapara Yuga. There's another 1900 to go. Then there's Treta Yuga. It's only in Treta Yuga where we start getting into the realms of thought, of that higher consciousness. Then it's another 3,600 years before we even get to Satya Yuga. So, and there's no guarantee that we're going to even keep incarnating on this planet because we go where our consciousness is. So we want to do something that's more. We want to reach higher. We want to go beyond. We want to be on the spiritual path. We want to do what the masters have came to tell us that we can do. We want to experience that light, that consciousness, that cosmic sound of Om right now. And we have to do it on the spiritual path. So we have our techniques of meditation, which help quiet, which help us to tune in to those things around there, to get rid of our little fences of our ego. We have our affirmations. We have our all our practices on the spiritual path. We have the living a good moral life. We live a good moral life because we don't want to separate ourselves. We don't want to be in that brutish consciousness. We want to start moving towards the consciousness of divine, which is kind, which is all generous, which is all loving, which is joyful. So we practice those things. We do it. The masters have given us another help in this, and that's one of the things that was in the reading this year. They have actually described to us what it's like in those other levels of consciousness. Now we know it's not easy for us to figure that out, but it's just like the snorkels on the cars. If you start reading about it and you start thinking about it and you start imagining it, when it does come, when you do catch a glimpse of it, you'll be able to latch on to that and you say, wow, yeah, that was a glimpse of something higher. That was an experience of a higher consciousness. So we need to know something about it, even if it's difficult, it has to be described in language. Language is rooted in experience, shared experience. If you don't have the shared experience, the concept doesn't always translate. The masters use metaphors a lot. They use poetry. They use these imagery, but just start tuning into that. And there's a few really key ones that Yogananda has given us. The first one is the first one that you may have skipped over, which is a really critical chapter. It's chapter 43 in the autobiography of a yogi. It's Yogananda's autobiography. It's the resurrection of Sri Yukteswar. How many people remembered that chapter the first time they read it? It was something that is like, oh my God. He describes what the astral world is like. He describes what the causal world is like. This Yukteswar comes back after his supposed death and is talking to Yogananda. Yukteswar was Yogananda's guru. And he describes where he is now. I'm on Hiranyaloka, helping other souls to evolve further. There's a tremendous number of things in there. Just keep rereading that. Just keep imagining that consciousness. That astral world. He says the astral worlds are right here. There's people in the astral world looking down at us right now. And we can't see them, but they're perceiving us. They know what we're doing. They're all around us. Babies sometimes, they can perceive those astral entities, or if you're really tuned in, but we've put up our fences and kind of tuned it out. But if you read this thing enough and you make it part of your consciousness, you might be able to tune in more to the devas, the fairies, the astral worlds, the other higher consciousness, and the consciousness of the masters. The second thing that Yogananda gave us was his poem Samadhi. And it's in the chapter in the autobiography called An Experience of Cosmic Consciousness. And it's a masterpiece of spiritual literature because he's tried to take what is that higher consciousness that we comprehendeth not in our darkness. What is that higher consciousness, and how do we start relating to it? And he has all kinds of images and metaphors and poetic depictions of what that state of consciousness is like. And it's fabulous. It's just, he urged all his devotees, memorize that poem, recite it daily. Why? Because it helps us to start attuning to those realities. I mean, it's pretty hard to comprehend some of it, but you repeat it enough times and you hear it and you think about it, and it's still hard to comprehend, but at least you're moving in that direction. Just pick a line in there and meditate on it. Thoughts of all men, past, present, to come. Okay, when you're in samadhi, you're in tune with all thoughts that have been thought in the past, that are being thought now, and that are going to be thought. That's a pretty big concept. You could talk about each particle of universal dust. You're aware of each particle of universal dust. The farthest nebulae, hundreds of thousands of light years, millions of light years away, there's a piece of dust floating out there. You are aware of that piece of cosmic dust. So, meditate on that. It'll help expand your consciousness. Get it out there. There's one other one that I wanted to mention, and that was what was mentioned in the reading this time, was the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And that little passage we had at the end of the reading was from the 11th chapter. And the 11th chapter is when Arjuna, the protagonist of the Bhagavad Gita, who's the disciple, is talking to Krishna, who represents the divine, his guru. And he says, okay, you've told me all these things. I've heard about all this stuff. I want to see it. I want to experience it. So Krishna gives him the gift of divine sight through the spiritual eye, and he lets him perceive what Krishna consciousness, what God consciousness is like. And again, there's a poetic rendition of it there in the iconography, in the metaphors of the Hindu world of a couple thousand years ago, but it's still a very, very thrilling depiction of it. Yogananda in his commentaries in the Gita said, memorize this, read this, chant this. He said people chanting these verses will awaken the memory of that cosmic consciousness from which we've all come. And both Yogananda and Kriyananda have written a fairly literal translation of that chapter into more modern day language. So it's worth reading. And in Kriyananda's, it's in his interpretations of the Gita, and Yogananda wrote it into the one that was published by Self-Realization Fellowship of his interpretations. But those three things, they give us a glimpse of where we're going, because we really do have that power to move to that higher consciousness. We're in darkness. We comprehend, if not a lot of stuff, but we can move. We can keep going that way. We can focus our telescopes. We just clean the dust of our telescopes, clean those material desires off the dust of our telescopes, and calm ourselves so our telescope isn't shaking as we're looking. Calm all those thoughts. And you can start looking out there, start projecting out there in deep meditation, in your satsang, in company with the saints, in just visualizing, looking at those things. Aim for that light. That light is us. It's our birthright. That divine light, it's all around us. We just need to tune in. If we put our efforts to that, if we take all the things that the masters have given us, that divine birthright will be ours. We will realize that divine light.
Brother, I've a faint suspicion you and I've been led astray, taught to drive the devil from us. We've invited him to stay. What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness with a stick, with a stick. No, you can't drive out the devil with a stick. Some proclaim all men are sinners, can't escape the devil's might. How their interest must intrigue him, they won't let him out of sight. What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness. Talking sin, no, we can't drive out the devil talking sin. Some of us were taught the slogan, social evils must be slain. But can anger drive out sorrow? How can passion conquer pain? What we need is light, for we can't drive out the darkness while we hate. No, you can't drive out the devil while you hate. Brother, have you ever wondered why the darkness lingers on? If we want to see the sunrise, let us turn and face the dawn. What we need is light, for we'll only best the darkness when we love, yes, we only best the devil when we love.